Boatworks today is sponsored by Total Boat and Alexial Yacht Coatings, as well as supported by the generosity from the beautiful folks over on Patreon. Thank you so much. So welcome back, everybody. Hope you are having a fantastic weekend. My name is Andy with Boatworks today, and this week I want to go over how I intend to manage, or at least how I hope to be able to manage, all of the dust and fumes that you're going to run into whenever you're working on boats, whether it's grinding fiberglass, wood dust, what have you. It's a dusty job. So with that said, let's get started. Now, before I get started on what my plans are for here at the new shop, I want to talk real briefly a little bit about some of the things that I've tried in the past, specifically over at the old shop. Now, really at the end of the day, the direction that you decide to go with this, because there are a few different routes that you can take, the direction you decide to go ultimately is going to be dictated by how you intend to use that space, right? Now, for example, back at the old shop, my focus with the work that I was doing there at that time was a lot of spraying. I was doing some large jobs, 40, 50-foot boats, and I was doing an awful lot of spraying. Now, there, my goal with that location, with the work that I was doing at that time, was to be able to not so much mitigate the dust, but to mitigate the fumes and the overspray. So what I did is I essentially tried to turn the work bay there into kind of like a little mini, well, not mini, it was still 30 by 55, but basically a spray booth, an oversized spray booth. Now, it's not, obviously it wasn't a real booth, it's all got filtered air and lights and all that fancy crap everywhere, but when you're working on things of that size, 40, 50-foot boats, you really can't, well, maybe you can if you have unlimited funds, but for the most part, it's just not practical to try and put together a quote-unquote spray booth for objects or items of that size. So keeping that in mind, the way that I tried to do this was basically I had, it was kind of like a two-part system. So I had one part, the part one was maybe there's a better name for this, but I always called it the air makeup system. And essentially this thing was freaking huge. It was a beast. It took up an entire 12 by 16 foot room. And what this did is it pulled air in from the outside, basically passed it through this huge torch. It was a 500,000 BTU torch. So that heated it, and then it pumped it into the building. There really wasn't much in the way of filtration. I mean, there was like one major, mesh screen. Basically, it would keep birds from being able to get blown into the shop. But for the most part, bugs, dust, they came in, they got torched, and they got piped right into the shop where you were working. So that big makeup system, that was bringing air in, heated air, at 3,000 cubic feet per minute. Now, whenever you have that kind of volume of air coming in, you've got to have that volume of air going back out just to keep the air in the building balanced. I don't know. I guess it can run into problems with overpressurization with boilers and furnaces and whatever. So anyways, so I had 3,000 cubic feet of heated air coming in, and then in the back of the shop, I had two decent-sized exhaust fans, each one moving around 1,500. So I had, between the two of them, 3,000 CFM going out. So we actually did this little balance test, kind of whatever, but the air pressure inside that building was balanced. So at the end of the day, how did that kind of a setup work? Well, basically for the type of work that I was doing at that time, it worked pretty well when I used it. Now, I'm going to go over just real quick some of the advantages and disadvantages. I'm going to start with the advantages of that type of approach first because, well, honestly, it's a shorter list. So as far as the advantages, like I said, when I used it, it worked pretty well. Now, with the square footage that I was trying to turn into a spray booth, basically I want to say it was like 225,000 cubic feet, okay, give or take. Now, if I'm moving 3,000 CFM, in and out, so that means, in theory, I was able to exchange all of the air within that workspace every 8-ish minutes, which isn't bad. I mean, basically, with the jobs that I did in there, I would be, let me back up a little bit. So even when I was doing some of my large spray jobs, I've been into other workshops, when they're doing a spray job, it is just like a fog, a heavy layer of fog in that entire building. I mean, it's just eerie looking. I mean, it's just like the thickest fog you've ever been in. I can't imagine that's real safe. I mean, one little spark and poof. But anyways, I never ever had that. I mean, there was always a little bit of a haze, a slight haze, when I was constantly pulling the trigger on a gun for 15, 20 minutes straight, there was always a little bit of a fog or a haze in the air, but it never really got thick. By the time I emptied up my pressure pot and I had to go back and refill, that usually took about 8-10 minutes. By the time I basically cleaned out the gun or flushed it, refilled it, primed it, got back up into the ladder or scaffolding, whatever I was on, usually by that time, the air was pretty much clear. And I'm not going to say that you could walk around without a mask on, at least not after 8 to 10 minutes. But after 15, 20 minutes, absolutely, you could walk in there and you really couldn't even smell anything. So when I was actually using it with that type of work, it actually worked pretty well. Now, that's really the only advantage there, because there's an awful lot of disadvantages. Now, for example, I already touched on this. The actual one disadvantage is just the actual sheer size of it. I mean, it is a huge system. Like I said, the makeup system itself took up a 12 by 16 foot room. I'm talking wall to wall, ceiling to the floor. It took up the entire space. So it's big. Now, usually when you're talking about equipment, usually the bigger it is, the more expensive it is. And that system was very expensive. Back at the time, which is going back 12, 13-ish years ago when I built that place, at that time, the makeup system alone, I don't even think this included the install, but just the actual unit itself was around $16,000. By the time I figured in the install and having oversized propane lines run from the tank on a separate regulator coming in, I want to say I was well north of $20,000 for that system. Now, as far as the operating costs for that unit, that really depended on how cold the air was that you were bringing in. So if the outside temperature was, say, 30, 40 degrees, it didn't take a whole lot of propane to kind of temper that air to 60, 65-ish. Now, on the other hand, if it was at 0 Fahrenheit, that torch was running full bore, and that was kind of my cutoff. If it was it had to be at least 0 degrees Fahrenheit or above before I would even think about using that. I tried it one time when it was actually like 10, 15 below 0. Again, it was probably like the second or third time I'd ever used it. And so much gas was leaving the tank, the propane tank, coming through this regulator, so much was flowing through there that it actually froze the regulator and the system just shut down. So there was a limit, even though it's, you can bring in cold air and temper it, to room temps. There was a limit as far as when you could use it. Now, at that time, we were in northern Wisconsin. Now, granted, most of the time you're at 0 or above, sometimes barely, but there are stretches of time when you are 10, 15, 20 below 0. Not necessarily just at night, but even sometimes during the day. So it worked pretty well, regardless of the temperature, but there were some limitations. Now, getting back to the operating costs, when it was cold, you could literally watch the needle on that tank drop. I mean, I would go through probably in 1 week, typically if I'm doing a larger spray job, it's not usually just the boat. There's the boat, and then there's bits and pieces of things that you take up off the boat, then you spray separately down on the floor and that kind of a thing. So throughout a week of a spraying process, I would go through about 400 gallons of propane. Now, at that time, gas was cheap. I forget what we were paying at the time, but I can compare it to this year. This year, propane is around $2 a gallon. Now, figure that out. If you're doing 400 gallons at $2 a gallon, that's an $800 a week just for the fuel. So, cost-wise, it wasn't real effective. It is what it is. I mean, with that type of a system, that was just one of those operating costs that you had to roll into the jobs. And as far as how often I actually use that system, I mean, setting aside the operating costs, just the actual work that was involved just to get it ready to actually turn on, it was just inconvenient, because it wasn't just a matter of flipping the switch. Well, I mean, it was a matter of flipping the switch to get the makeup unit on, but I couldn't run that without running the exhaust fans. And, again, living in a cold climate, outside I had basically screwed down covers or insulated covers over the exhaust fans on there, just to, try and keep some of the warm air in and the cold air out. So every time I had to use it, I had to, trudge outside, dig out the snowbank, set up the ladder, pull off those covers, and then go back in and repeat that process at nighttime, cover everything back up. So there was an inconvenience factor there that a lot of times I'm just kind of like, screw it, I just don't want to deal with it, so I didn't. Sometimes I probably should have, but I didn't, just because I didn't want to go through 20 minutes of screwing around for 10 minutes of work. It didn't make sense. So as far as the convenience factor, it wasn't real fluid to use. So, like I said, I probably should have used it more, but unless I was really going to be working that system for an entire day, or at least a half a day, I wasn't even going to bother going through that hassle. So switching gears over to the new shop, how are things going to be different here? Well, basically, I'm not going to be spraying here, at least not doing anything of really any size. My days of working on the big 40, 50-foot boats, repainting them, they're done. I'm not going to do that anymore. I paid my dues. I'm done with that. So that's basically the biggest difference here versus back at the old shop as far as how I want to approach, plans of being able to mitigate the dust and specifically the fumes. Now, because I'm not going to be, doing any large spraying, my focus is no longer on trying to mitigate overspray. It's going to be managing dust and fumes. And what I went with for this shop were 3 units made by a company called Industrial Made. Now, this is a US-based company out of, I believe it's Cortland, Nebraska. And the specific units that I went with, because they make a number of different ones, but the specific ones that I went with were their 3000i units. So now, as you can see here, these units are still pretty good size. Now, for some rough measurements, figure 2 feet by 2 feet, and then this particular unit, the 3000i series, this is roughly 6 feet long. Now, overall, the way that this thing operates is it pulls air in from either side. So you've got air being pulled in from both sides. It goes through a series of filters, which I'll touch more on here in a minute, and then it exhausts all of your clean air out, through the front, where you can basically direction it, if you want to go up and down, left, right. You can basically point where you want all of the clean air to go to try and get some, if you want to try and get some kind of a vortex of airflow within your shop, just to kind of help with the efficiency of the filtering, you can certainly do that. Now, because these units are self-contained, what that means to me specifically is that there's no venting. And even more specific, there's no makeup air system that needs to be heated. So basically all you're doing is you're pulling air in from inside your heated space, filtering it, and kicking it right back out. So operating costs on this, I'm not going to be running the boiler anymore. And it's going to help to circulate the air, the heated air within this building. That's a question I've gotten a few times over the past couple weeks, is that, are you going to put some ceiling fans up in the shop here to kind of drive some of that heat down? And no, because these are going to be my basically air movement. That's how I'm going to keep everything moving air-wise within this space. Now, as far as the filters on this particular unit, I don't know what the actual MERV or what the actual ratings are for each of these specific filters, but I will go ahead and post that information up as I'm doing the editing here. Now, the first thing is this is kind of just like a pre-filter. Basically, this is just going to suck out, or I should say catch, any major particles, whatever that may be. The way I look at this as kind of like a cheap insurance policy on your more expensive filters. So that was filter number 1. Filter number 2, this is probably about 3 inches thick, give or take. And again, I'll post all of the specific MERV ratings up for these filters. Number 2, let's see. Filter 3 is kind of interesting. It's just a bunch of these pleats in here. I do know one thing, when you have pleated filters like this, you greatly extend the actual life of these types of filters. Now, the 4th filter is an 8-pound charcoal, I guess, carbon filter. Now, and again, this is probably about 2 inches thick. Now, why this is important? This is what's going to help to take care of your fumes. Now, think about respirators. Though you get those little cans that screw onto the side of your respirator. Those are filled with charcoal. That's what filters out all of your organic compounds. So coming through here, going from start to finish, it's going to filter all the particles out, even down to the very, very fine ones. And then the second to last step then is it's going to actually mitigate any of the fumes. Now, I have high hopes for this. I just, on theory, the way that this works, or the way that this is set up, this should work extremely well. I already know it works very well for the dust, but I haven't really done any fiberglassing in here yet to see how it's going to manage with this. But if this works the same as the filters, which it's exactly the same kind of a concept, this is going to work like a charm. Now the last layer of filtration on here is a bit futuristic, and to be honest, it seems like it's something you'd see in a sci-fi movie. But this is a bipolar ionization module. Now, honestly, do I understand what this means? Not at all. But my very basic understanding of this is that essentially this creates positive and negative ions through the, as it's rotating through the blower here, shoots that out into the air, and then those positive and negative ions, they bond with things, whether it's bacteria or viruses or dust, whatever. They bond with them and it robs them of some hydrogen molecule or something and essentially renders them harmless or basically dead. Now I know I am totally butchering the explanation of this, so I will include a link down below in the description to their website where you can get the actual true explanation of how this really works. But enough talking. I want to get this thing up on the wall. All right, gonna do a little bit of a little walk around thing, kind of more or less to do like an audio check, but I've got both units running. So that's one we just installed. And then the other one's back there in the corner. So I have both units running right now, and I don't expect I'm gonna ever be able to do real recording while these things are running. But I don't know yet. I haven't been able to chance to look over this video. So this is just to kind of basically give me a little bit of a sample of what I can anticipate. All right, so let's talk some numbers. Now, each of these units run about, or scrub about 3,000 cubic feet of air per minute, right? So between the two of them, at least on paper, it should be right around 6 when the unit is running on high. Now, I toggled between the high and the low setting on each of these, and there really doesn't sound like there's much of a difference in the motor. So I'm probably just going to run these things on low. I got to believe it's going to be a little less taxing on the motor, kind of doing it that way. But so let's just say conservatively that each one does roughly 2,500 cubic feet per minute. So total 5,000 cubic feet. Now, the volume inside this new shop here, let's see here, minus this lower mezzanine area, because if I'm doing anything dusty in here, those doors are going to be closed, and so that air in there is not going to be getting scrubbed. So we're talking about this main area inside the shop here. So that comes out to roughly 27,000 cubic feet. Now remember, these walls are 16 feet tall. So that adds a lot more volume than, say like a typical garage shop or, whatever. So 27,000 cubic feet. So now if both of these units are running, that means I'm, on paper, scrubbing all of the air in this building roughly every 5 minutes, 5.5 minutes, give or take. That's pretty damn impressive if you ask me. Now compare that to my other shop, my old shop system there. This is about twice as fast, and it's not burning up any fuel. Propane prices, I don't care what propane does anymore. I'm still able to get this job done and for a lot less money. More numbers. All right, now as far as the maintenance cost on these. Now remember, each of these particular units, you can get smaller units that don't have 2 sets of filters, one on each end. But for these particular units, really the only maintenance cost is going to be on the filters, obviously. So basically what it was recommended to me, and again, that's going to vary depending on how much you're running them, and more specifically how much crap they're having to filter out of the air, right? So what I'm anticipating is that the blue main, coarse filter, I guess, and then the 2 sets of pleated filters, I'm expecting that I'm going to probably have to replace those about every 6 months, so twice a year. And then the inside, the 8-pound charcoal filter, probably annually, maybe like once in the, every fall time I'll just replace all that. Now, again, for these particular units, so on each scrubber, I've got 2 sets of each of those filters. So for each of these, I'm looking at about a maintenance cost, or an annual, year-round, an annual maintenance cost of around $400, $450 per unit. Now, that may sound high, but I guess, again, kind of putting this into perspective, when I was running my other unit, I was running through $800 worth of fuel in 1 month. All of a sudden now, 12 months of operation for about that same price, all of a sudden that's not a lot. That's sounding pretty damn good if you ask me. I mean, because to be honest, at the end of the day, if you're doing anything to try and mitigate dust, fumes, whatever it may happen to be, regardless of the approach that you take, there's going to be costs associated with that. There's just no way around that. Now, I'm sure the question that everybody's kind of curious about is, what was the cost on these units? Now, there's a base cost, and then there's upgrades and stuff that you can do, which I did. I did some upgrades on the motor, so I upgraded to a sealed motor just because of the material that I work with, namely fiberglass. So it's a sealed motor. I also opted for those blue filters around the exterior, they're kind of like pre-filters to the main filters. I figured, well, it's not that much more, and it can't hurt, right? So I opted for that. And then the last option that I did is basically on the line of these scrubbers. So Industrial Made in this size makes 2 units. They make the 3000I, which is what I have, which the I stands for the ionization, and then they make a 3000, I think it's T. Is that T? Yeah, the 3000T, which does not have the ionization. Now, there is about a $1,000 difference between those 2 units. So looking at base price for the 3000i, the one that I have here, on their website, I believe it came in around $3,600 per unit. And any upgrades that you do, obviously would be above and beyond that. Now, the base price on the 3000T, the identical unit, just without the ionization package. I think you can still get those with the charcoal filter, but I'm not 100% positive on that. We'll have to look at that on their website. But that base price for the 3000T, then that came in at $2,600. So again, it's $1,000 difference. And to be quite honest, for that price, I'm looking at the T. So for $2,600, that is going to be more than adequate, I would suspect, for probably 98% of anybody out there looking to step into something like this, whether it's for a small workshop or a garage, whatever it may happen to be. I kind of ponied up because again, like I mentioned, I'm going to have my girls up here a lot, and I didn't take any chances. Buy once, cry once has been my attitude for the past 8 months with the move and the house, and just get it done. So I went with the some of the upgrades and the ionization package on the 3000 unit. But to be quite honest, the 3000T, which I'm guessing is probably the unit they sell the most of, I suspect that would be more than adequate for really any workshop. And to be able to get in this kind of a dust maintenance system, or a dust elimination system, what is the word I'm looking for? To get rid of all the dust in your air for roughly $2,600. Yeah, it's a chunk of money, but it's, in all honesty, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that bad. Certainly not when you compare the 20 grand to my old unit. All right, now before I close this out, the proof is in the pudding. Now, this first filter that I put in, back in this back wall behind the Bertram here, I put this in about a week ago, and up to this point, it's got maybe 4 hours-ish of total runtime. And I haven't really done anything dusty in the shop. All that dustiness was done when it would have been nice to have had these when I was cutting all the OSB for the walls and the ceiling, but whatever. So I haven't really been doing anything dusty in here since this has been installed. But again, after 4 hours of runtime, you can see a clear outline of what kind of crap it's pulled out of the air. So there's no doubt these things are moving some air, which is good. It's exactly what I want. It's almost like a wind tunnel in here when they're both running. And with that said, I think I'm going to close this video out because I suspect it's getting a little long. So as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you found it informative. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Thank you in advance. Really appreciate it. If you have any questions, comments about these units, or really anything else, any other videos I've done in the past, feel free to leave those down below. I'll do my best to get back with you. And as always, thank you for your time. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.
This has been a Boatworks Today production.